Okay, and we are live on Facebook with the Mr. Amazing Bob Burg. I want to welcome Bob to the show. Walls of Wall or Breakthrough Walls. I almost said my book. Sorry, Breakthrough Walls. Look, I want to give Bob a shout out because I read this book. I believe it's been about 2.5 years ago now, and it literally blew me away. The Go Giver, and so Bob just came out recently with a new book, and I know you'll want to talk about your co-author, who I don't know like I know you. He's not as public facing, I don't think, as you are, but. But the Go Giver Influencer, I read this book and wow, 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 wow is all I
Thank you.
have to say. So, Bob, welcome and thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you. Congratulations on your new book. I know it's done very, very well. It's a fantastic book. I got to give it a read through, and wow, it's terrific. And what you said about John is really true. He's not really the public face. He's so in demand as a co-author and as a ghostwriter that you can walk into most bricks and mortar stores and you'll see 5 or 10 books that are on the New York Times bestsellers list, and half of them John's name isn't even on there because he was paid to ghostwrite it, and the others he's on there as the co-author. But he's just so prolific. But yeah, and by the way, when I used to put on my business partner Kathy Tajanel and I used to put on yearly events, live events, and we had John speak at those. He's a dynamic speaker. He's fantastic. He just chooses not to really do that. He's more at the computer and doing his writing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, he's an incredible guy. I mean, you guys have done some fantastic things. So, I know, and I don't want to take up all day with you because I know you're a very busy guy. But I wanted to kind of, I had the I literally was kind of engaged in a little bit of a conversation. I ended up backing out of it. I'm just like, this isn't for me. But I saw you through I heard your interview through our mutual friend Grant Cardone. I don't know, 3-4 years ago, I think.
About that, yeah.
I started looking you up and I literally cold called you, didn't I?
Yeah, I didn't realize it was from that interview.
Yeah, it was. I looked you up and I'm like, I want to talk to him about becoming a client, and I was blessed with the opportunity to do some work for you, on some things. So very, very grateful for that. You're an amazing guy, and so I guess. The conversation I started to engage, it was about somebody saying cold calling doesn't work. I'm like, well, if you do it the right way and you build a relationship, I think it can work. But
I don't know why anyone would say that. That's one of those statements people make that is so overarching
right.
and without context.
I agree with you. So let's talk. Let's start out with. Who Bob Burg is, where it all started for you, like where you were born and raised and all of that stuff.
Well, I grew up in Massachusetts.
Okay.
Got down here to Florida as fast as I could. Nothing against Massachusetts. I just don't like the cold weather. I'm kind of a wimp, and I would much rather be in the warm weather if possible.
I hear you. I hear you. So you're a Boston fan of everything then in sports?
Grew up that way, but no, as soon as I moved to Florida, I shifted allegiances. And
Did you?
yeah. So South Florida, the Miami teams are the funny thing is when I was growing up in Massachusetts, the New England Patriots were the worst teams and the Miami Dolphins were the best. Yeah. And I come down here 30 years ago and all of a sudden the big shift happened. So
Right. Right. I was talking with our friend Lisa Copeland.
I love Lisa.
Lisa's
one of my heroes.
Mine too. I love her. So I interviewed her the other day, and I asked her this question as well. I've found that typically as adults, there was something that influenced us as children that made us get into whatever we're into as adults. And so I'm always curious, like, was there anything in your like childhood that influenced who you became as an adult? Was there anything that sticks out to you that like you're like, yeah, that really kind of shoved me in the direction I've gone throughout adulthood?
Well, I think just being brought up by the parents I was brought up by. I wanted to, live a life that certainly would make them proud. And I don't mean that in a way sacrificing my own happiness
Right.
and that's not what they would want. Brought up by just very great people who, I would want to emulate. It's interesting. I was having breakfast at a local place, my favorite place, the Juno Beach Cafe. And I was having breakfast, and I won't say who it was just because I don't have permission, from him to say this, but he's a retired CEO of a huge company. And he's about my age. And we were talking about a charity he's involved with and some of the work he's done. He's since retired from what he's done. And he says, and it was just part of the conversation. It came up. He said, I think my parents are really proud of me for, what I've done. And I thought, isn't that really cool? Because here's a guy who, again, the company, okay, and just a huge CEO. Yeah. And his biggest thing was, that his parents are proud of him.
Right.
And it said a lot about him and it said a lot about his parents, but it was just that, you wouldn't expect, that's not something you'd expect to hear or for whatever reason, or you wouldn't read that in a Wall Street Journal article or something. It was just so cool to hear. And that really says so much,
Yeah.
Our upbringing is important.
It really is. And that's, I have two young daughters, and I see it. I see it every day. You don't really until you're looking into the eyes of your own child screaming at you about something. It's like wait a minute, why is this going like this? Where did I go wrong? I'm kidding. We have two wonderful daughters. So, I think in your, I believe, and I can't find anything about you as far as your career choices prior to becoming an author. So I'm just curious, like at some point you were in sales, I assume?
Yeah.
Well,
that's really it. I mean, really just, I was a good salesperson.
Yeah.
That's it. No, was not the leader of a Fortune 500 company or anything like that. I just got really proficient at sales. I worked at it. I studied it. Got very much into personal development and applied the information when I was selling and eventually became sales manager of a company. But,
Right.
Again, it was really just doing an unremarkable thing, but just doing it well, learning it and doing it well. And, that's really what it is. That's why, what was I going to say? Yeah, there won't be any, I never say anything, as far as, well, I did this and did that, because really, I don't really feel it was anything other than I was a really good salesperson.
Right. Where did you go to college?
I did. I went to a very, very small college in northwestern Massachusetts. I barely graduated high school. I was not a good student. And in fact, on the day of graduation, I remember the guidance counselor came up to me actually on graduation day after the caps were thrown in the air and, all that stuff. He saw me. We crossed paths. He said, Berg, he said, I can't believe I'm even seeing you here today. But here's the thing. He was a really good guy. I mean, I know that doesn't sound like a very encouraging thing to say, but he was a great guy. You need to have to know. I mean, I just was never there. And it was kind of amazing that I even graduated. Yeah. And then in college, it was much the same thing. I got in college on academic probation, which was no big deal, but I'm pretty sure I graduated on academic probation as well. I mean, I just saw no value in it, which of course I regret now. I mean, yeah. I wish that I understood that what high school was about and what college was about was not necessarily learning the stuff they taught as much as just learning how to learn, you know? And so it wasn't until I got into sales, and this is, I guess, why I love sales so much. Yeah, I started out as a broadcaster, first in radio and then in television, and I wasn't very good at that, and that's when I landed in sales. I just kind of found myself in sales and floundered until I floundered for the first few months because I had no idea what I was doing. And then I was in a bookstore one day and I got a couple of books, one by Zig Ziglar, one by Tom Hopkins, and I studied those books. And I mean, I studied those books and I began applying it right away. And within 3 weeks, my sales began to go through the roof. And this was really encouraging to me because it said if you have a system for doing something, a methodology, there pretty much isn't anything you can't do.
Right.
And to this day, I would define a system as simply the process of predictably achieving a goal based on a logical and specific set of how-to principles. In other words, if it's been proven that by doing A, you'll get the desired result of B, then you know all you need to do is A and continue to do A, and eventually you'll get the desired results of B. This is what you teach people to do all the time in your work. It's you know what Grant Cardone teaches people in his work, and it's what what have you. And so then I began really studying personal development because, my sales manager said, well, if you really want to, you need to get books like How to Win Friends and Influence People and The Magic of Thinking Big and Psycho-Cybernetics and, all these, well, I ate them up. I mean, these were just, it was like input. You start to learn that success really begins on the inside and it manifests itself outwardly. But that began my desire for education. And it was an education that, to me has just paid off in dividends.
So now, did you do the sales that you started in, the first sales position you had? What type of company was it? Like in business to business sales or residential or?
Started out in advertising, and so that was business to business. Then I was selling.
That's baptism by fire right there.
It was. And then another one was business to consumer because I was selling solar energy hot water heaters. And this is, again, close to 40 years ago. So that's really where I kind of made my bones big time. And that's where I worked my way up to being sales manager. So
door to door.
It wasn't door to door by nature, but we turned it door to door. We began knocking on doors as just another way of building up the business. But it really wasn't. It began with a bunch of kids in the phone bank, calling people to see if they, blah, blah, blah. And you go in and you were greeted by somebody who said, good evening, Mr. because they were, always at night. Good evening, Mr. Salesman. Welcome to our home. I just want to let you know we ain't buying nothing tonight. And, that was the greeting. And but it was fun. I loved it. I absolutely just love sales.
Yeah. I'm with you. I told somebody recently, I'll bet you I've sat at 10,000 kitchen tables with Bob and Mary.
And it was always the kitchen table that you wanted to sit at. Absolutely.
That's where they write the checks to pay their bills. So, that's what I was always told. But so you've been in sales, your entire life. It sounds like pretty much after college. Yeah. At some point, and from what I can find, it looks like what was your first book that you wrote?
First book was Endless Referrals.
That's what I
Network Your Everyday Contacts into Sales. Yeah, that was really a how-to book. And it was for people who were in sales who really, they love their product or service. They knew they brought tremendous value to the table through it, but they really just were uncomfortable in the process of going out and meeting new people and developing and cultivating relationships. And then even once they had the sale and being able to obtain referrals afterwards. So I kind of brought them a step-by-step methodology, a system, if you will, for doing that. So that was really the first, my first big one.
So were you, am I correct? Was it 2005?
Well, it came out first in 1994.
Oh, wow.
And then we revised it in 1999 and then revised it again in 2005. Funny
Wow.
thing is, the third revision, it sold about 300,000 copies so far. And so it's had a good run, steadily over the years. But it's funny, the last one came out right before the social media craze really hit. So the publisher of that book, which is a different one than my Go-Giver publisher, the publisher of that book would like me to do an updated, revised edition, which I should. And I just haven't found the time. I haven't made the time, because we find the time to do what we, value most high.
Right.
But it just isn't something right now that I've chosen to take the time to do. But it is a good idea, and it's something I most likely will do within the next couple of years or so.
Yeah. Well, I know you have a pretty full plate. So, what was it that, for me, and I have people asking questions like Dario wants to know what is on your bookshelf. That's a lot of stuff back there.
Yeah, Dario or Dario?
Dario.
Hi, Dario. A lot of books, and that's just one small part of my home library. I've got them all over the house, all over the place. But probably many of the same books you have. If you're watching this show and you're a student of Ken's, we all pretty much read the same books, a lot of them.
Yeah.
And probably as many of the same ones you have.
The way that you, and this, again, I told you, this is kind of I don't have a stand. I like to just free flow as much as possible. I believe that's where real genuine stuff comes from. But I read your books, and the way that you write the stories, like in the first Go-Giver book, is it
Pindar?
Pindar, yeah. I mean, it's just incredible the way that you write these stories out, and it's amazing. But what inspired you? What was it that made you say, I got to write a book? What was on the very first book? Because I know that experience. I know what it feels like to hold your first copy of your written book, and you're like, but what inspired you? What made you say, I got to do this?
Yeah, and by the way, for the Go-Giver books, which I co-author with John David Mann, he's really the lead writer and storyteller. So,
Wow.
I don't want to take credit for me writing the book. Believe me, this guy he's a genius, and it's just an honor to get to work with him. With my other books, which I've written, like Endless Referrals and Adversaries into Allies, and all those. I wrote those, but those are how-to books.
Yeah.
How-to books are pretty easy to write. You write down what you know or what you think you know,
Right.
and that's kind of what you do. Now, the first one, so in answer to your question in terms of the inspiration, because there were two different types of inspiration for the different books. For Endless Referrals, the inspiration was totally utilitarian. I had been speaking for a few years. I, again, learned a system for marketing a speaking business, because it's the same for any business. You learn a system from those who've done it before you.
Right.
And so I was at a National Speakers Association convention, and more people were saying, Burg, you're at the point that if you're going to up your fees, position yourself, you really need to write a book. And it wasn't really something I wanted to do. I was never a big fan of actually writing, so it wasn't, it's not like, I've got to write a book. And I had at the time audio tapes out, not even that's how long ago this is, Ken.
Wow.
It wasn't CDs, it was tapes, which is sort of like one step above an 8-track. It was, and, but they said, it's something you really need to do. So I thought, okay, well, I had some cassette tapes out. I had one about Endless Referrals. I knew I'd have to go a little deeper into it, but I did. And so that book was simply for positioning. It was simply so that I could charge higher fees, be more desirable in the marketplace, be well positioned in the marketplace, and so forth. And it worked very well. It wasn't, I think I can name only 2 times I ever got a call asking me to speak because someone read the book and it went through a company and what's your fee? Can you speak? Only twice. Mainly I used it as an outbound marketing tool.
Wow.
And it worked very well. So that first one was really just for those reasons.
Wow.
go ahead.
No, go ahead. Sorry. You were saying?
No, I began writing other ones because I felt I had a message I wanted to get out there. And with The Go-Giver, that really big time, because I'd always read parables. I'd always enjoyed business parables.
Yeah.
And I thought, wouldn't it be cool? And sometime around 2003, 2004, just the idea began germinating. Wouldn't it be cool if we could take the basic premise of endless referrals, which is all things being equal, people will do business with and refer business to those people they know, like, and trust. Right. Anyone who's seen me like more than once was probably repeating that as I was saying it, because that's been my mantra forever. And take that and put it into a story. And so, that was really, so what's the main characteristic of someone who builds those kind of relationships? Well, they're always giving. They're focused on giving. Giving meaning giving value, always constantly and consistently looking to provide value to others, individuals and the marketplace. And so, then kind of came up with the title with The Go-Giver. And then asked, John David Mann was the editor-in-chief of a magazine I used to write for, and that's how I knew John. Few people knew John at the time. He was in demand in a very specific niche, but few people outside. Now everybody knows him, but back then they didn't. Fortunately, I did. Right. And so I knew of his genius and his brilliance, and so I asked John if he would co-author this and be the lead writer. And when I say I asked him, I mean I pleaded with him. And and so, he and his fiance at the time, Anna, now his wife, they were visiting her mom in Tampa, which is across the state from me. I live in Jupiter, Florida. Yeah. And they drove over one night. We had about a 4-hour dinner and discussion about what the book would be about and how to, blah, 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 the whole thing. And a few weeks later, he called me and said, yeah, I think we got something here. And that kind of started the whole Go-Giver movement or series and so forth.
Wow, that's incredible. That and I as you know, I just finished your most recent
the new one,
Go-Giver Influencer.
Thank you.
And what an incredible book, just like the other ones. Now I believe I have all of the Go-Giver books. It appears to me now that I need to pick up your other books. I need to get them. I think, when it comes to the Go-Giver Influencer, would you mind, and, could you take us through, because there's 5 secrets of genuine influence. What are, just kind of walk us through what your take on that, the 5 secrets.
Yeah. Well, I think, like anything else, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. And so there's a premise involved in terms of what influence really is. And even that, I think, is on 2 levels. The very basic definition of influence would be simply the ability to move a person or persons to a desired action, usually within the context of a specific goal. That's influence.
Right.
Now, that's the definition. I don't believe that's the substance or the essence of influence, though. The essence of influence, as we see it, is pull as opposed to push. We've all heard that leadership axiom, how far can you push a rope? And the answer is not very far, at least not very fast, very effectively, right?
Right.
And you don't hear people say things like, wow, that Julie or that Dave, he is so influential. He has a lot of push with people. No, he sure is pushy. Man, wow, what a great leader and influencer. No, he has a lot of pull, because that's what influence is.
Right.
It's pull. It's an attraction. Great influencers, genuine influencers, attract people first to themselves and then to their ideas. Yeah. And I think the best ones understand what I believe was Dale Carnegie's underlying premise in his classic How to Win Friends and Influence People. One sentence that summed up everything in his book, and it was a wonderful book. I could read every page of that book again and again, and I have, and it's wonderful. But there's one sentence that I think summed it all up, and this is where Carnegie wrote, ultimately, people do things for their reasons, not our reasons. This is understanding and respecting human nature. Okay. And so I think the great influencer does this. They tap into this by asking themselves questions to check their own intent. For example, how does what I'm asking this person to do, how does it align with their goals, with their wants, their needs, their desires? How does what I want this other person to do, how does it align with their values? And when asking ourselves these questions thoughtfully, intelligently, genuinely, authentically, not as a way to manipulate another human being into doing our will, but as a way of building everyone in the process, now we've come a lot closer to earning their commitment, as opposed to trying to depend on some type of compliance, which is, fraud or force or guilting someone or doing something, and which at best is not sustainable. At worst, it's just such a turnoff, people will resist you. I love what my great friend, the leadership authority, Dondi Scumaci, says about this. I love this. She says, compliance will never take you where commitment can go.
Wow.
And we only elicit commitment to our ideas by focusing on what will help the other person. Now, so with that in mind, John and I put together 5, we call them secrets, but there we put air quotes around secrets, but they're not secrets. They're and so
I love that.
The first one is to master your emotions. Now, this is so key because I'll just tell you, influence, as we just said, is all about the other person, okay?
Yeah.
But it begins with ourselves. Because it's only when we can master our own emotions, it's only when we're in control of our emotions, in control of ourselves, that we're even in a position to take a potentially negative situation or person and turn it into a win for everyone involved. Now, we know this. We all know this. Yet how often do we allow someone, through what they say or do, consciously or unconsciously, to push our emotional hot buttons, and we upset ourselves? We make ourselves frustrated or helpless feeling or annoyed or impatient or angry, and we say or do something totally counterproductive. And we know it. We know better.
Right.
Do it. Well, why? Well, because we're human beings. And as human beings, we are emotional creatures. It's how we're built. Now, we like to think we're logical, and of course, to a certain extent we are, but we're pretty emotionally driven. We make major decisions based on emotion, and we back up those emotional decisions with logic, right? We rationalize, which means we tell ourselves rational lies. And we do this to justify
Wow,
that.
I've never heard that. Hold it. Did you just say rational lies? Rational lies. Wow.
I'm sure I didn't make that up. I'm not that clever. I'm sure I'd heard that before. But I don't know who said it. And so we do that to justify what we know we shouldn't have done. So John and I are not saying that you should deny your emotions. We're not saying you should forego your emotions. Absolutely not. That, first of all, that wouldn't be logical, but it's also not necessary. Emotions are a great part of life. They bring us joy. They make life worthwhile. No, we're just saying make sure you're the master of your emotions rather than your emotions mastering you. Right. Or again, my friend Dondi Scumaci, who we just love, and she inspired a similar quote in the book. But Dondi says about this, by all means, take your emotions along for the ride, but make sure you are driving the car. And remember the judge, Judge Henshaw, she was one of the mentors in the story, because in this story there are mentors and 2 proteges. Yeah. She told her protege Jackson, she said, if you allow your emotions to be driving the car, you're actually putting yourself at the mercy of a drunk driver.
Yeah.
And so we need to make sure that we master our emotions, and we can train our brain to do so. It's actually very simple to do. It's something I had to do about 25, 30 years ago when I realized that my emotions and the anger issues I had were not only getting the best of me, they were just making me totally non-productive and counterproductive in the work I was doing, and I needed to take a weakness I had and really turn it into a strength.
Wow. That's incredible. Honestly, this entire interview for me rationalize that word, just that nugget right there that's incredible. And so the first step is you've got to master your emotions. The second secret would be what?
That would be to put yourself in the other person's shoes, step into the other person's shoes. Now, this saying we've all heard, it sounds kind of trite, and it sounds kind of easy, but then you think about it and you realize most of us have different size feet. So it's not necessarily easy. In other words, we all come from different ways of seeing the world. We come from different belief systems. We have our own subjective truths. Many of them are very unconscious in nature. We're pretty much run by an unconscious operating system that was given to us since birth and has taken hold through upbringing and environment and schooling and news media and all these different things. Right. Most conflict, Ken, is a matter of two or more people seeing the same basic thing from different viewpoints.
Right.
But here's the tough part, the insidious part. As human beings, we tend to believe that everyone else sees the world basically the same way we do. How could it be any different? It's all we know. Yeah. And so, but they don't. And so how do we step into another person's shoes? Well, we ask questions. And we ask questions and we listen. But we don't just listen in order to hear. We don't just listen with our ears. In fact, one of the other mentors, Coach George, said to Jillian, his protege, Don't just listen with your ears. That's the surface listening. That's what most of us do. We listen while we're thinking of our comeback, right? What we're going to say next and how we're going to overcome what this person's, right? So no, listen with your eyes, he said. Listen with your posture. Listen, he said, with the back of your neck. In other words, put your whole being into listening to this person. Really absorb everything they said. Listen in order to really, really learn where this person's coming from. That's how you step into another person's shoes. And when you do this, not only do you equip yourself to have more knowledge of the situation, right, but this person feels listened to. And they know that you care, and they know that you're looking and you're trying to understand. And that's a big difference maker. And that's when it comes to sales, when it comes to leadership, when it comes to friendship, when it comes to anything, parenting, when it comes to anything, now it's a whole different story.
I think that might be one of the most important steps, honestly, is people listen with their ears, like you said, and I've been guilty of it. I'm sure most people.
So have I, of course. It's very natural. It's very human.
Sure. And whether it's you're trying to sell your significant other on an idea or Mr. and Mrs. Jones a new kitchen countertop. So, and again, I don't know what your time limitations are. But if you want to, jump into the other secrets or just walk us through, sure, kind of, because I really think that, and here's my entire purpose behind asking this stuff is I really want people to go get this book because I think it can impact anybody in such a positive way. I really
Thank you. I appreciate that. Thank you. The third one is to set the proper frame. Or reset an already negatively set frame. This is very important. Setting the frame correctly will get you 80% from the get-go or from the give-go to whatever result you're looking to accomplish. What is a frame? Well, a frame is the foundation from which everything else evolves. I constantly tell the story of my favorite frame, which took place about 3 years ago. I was sitting at a Dunkin' Donuts restaurant, and there was a little boy about 2.5 years old, a toddler, who was running around the restaurant when his parents called him back over to the table. As he headed over there, he slipped. He fell on the floor. He didn't hurt himself, but you could tell he was certainly shocked. He was surprised. First thing he does, he looks at the two people he trusts most in the world, his parents, his mom and dad, to get their interpretation of the event. See, what happened. That's fact. He wanted to know what happens next? Where do we go from here? And I truly believe, Ken, that had his parents gotten upset or panicky or begun to, oh no, you are, I think he would have started, I know he would have started to cry. Right. But they handled it so beautifully. They walked over quickly, but very calmingly. They had that, they smiled and they applauded and they laughed and they said, "Oh, what a great trick. Oh, how fun." And immediately he began to laugh.
Right.
What the parents did is they set a productive frame from which he could operate. Now, we can do that in any situation when we meet another person, whether it's from just an inside-out smile and way of shaking their hands and looking at them so that they know that we welcome them, or it could be, or let's talk about a negatively set frame that we need to turn a little bit. We're visiting with a prospective customer, and she, again, kind of tells you defensively that, she's just looking right now, she's not buying, and blah, blah, blah. And, who knows? She's probably been high pressured before by a salesperson, or just doesn't trust herself, or has whatever it is. I mean, different people have, and we need to understand that.
Right.
So what if we kind of, instead of buying into that frame, okay, and having sort of a push against, each other, what if we instead just kind of reset that frame and we say something like, Mary, while we've been able to help a lot of people through this product, whether or not it's the right answer for you, we simply can't know without exploring deeper and determining whether it meets your needs. So please know our conversation is for both of us to discover this, and if it does, great. If not, that's okay too. Boom. So now we've totally reframed this from adversarial to one of two allies who both understand that our goal is to determine what is best for her, and that it's ultimately up to her.
Yeah, that's incredible. That is so
Remember,
important.
and I don't mean to interrupt. I apologize. As I think it was Judge Henshaw in the book said to Jackson, in every interpersonal transaction, a frame will be set. The only question is, who is going to set the frame? And if we depend on the other person to set the frame, then we're taking the chance that they, first of all, understand what a frame even is, which they probably don't, and that they care enough to set one properly, which is win-win in nature, which, again, they may or may not. So when we take the initiative to set the frame, and we know this frame is such that both parties have to feel good about themselves, both parties have to win. Yep. Now, again, we're 80% of the way there to the right outcome.
That's incredible, and I've seen that with our youngest daughter. In fact, recently she was walking up the steps and slipped, and we have these hardwood steps, and she banged her shin against it, and Lord have mercy, and I was able to help her kind of reset the frame, and the crying could have lasted for hours. It was huge, swelled up, and so that's so important. I love that. I absolutely love that. So what's the fourth step? Secret.
The fourth one, the fourth secret is to communicate with tact and empathy. This starts to really bring it home. My dad has always defined tact as the language of strength. And I've always enjoyed that definition, because to me it takes a strong person to be tactful, to control their and master their own emotions first, to step into that other person's shoes, okay? To look at the frame that's been set before just speaking, right? To ask yourself the question, how is what I'm about to say going to affect this other person? Is it going to build them up, or is it going to tear them down? Is it going to create harmony, or is it going to create resentment? And so to me, I see tact as a way of communicating what could be normally difficult information for someone to receive. And the fact is, sometimes we've got to correct or critique or constructively criticize or show someone a better way to do. It's life. It just is. Yeah. But tact allows us to do this, Ken, in a way that not only is this person not defensive toward us and resistant to our ideas, but they're open to us and more accepting of our ideas. There's a ton of power in speaking to people with tact and empathy.
There is. I agree. And what is and I remember from the book, and I remember I started speed reading, and I'm not a speed reader, but I was like, I got to get to the fifth one. Like, cause he says, and I forget, I think, one of them, maybe it was the coach, said, without the fifth one, all the other ones are kind of worthless. This kind of brings them all together, right? So
yeah. Well, so the actual secret, if you will, itself is to let go of having to be right. Now, as you know, in the Go-Giver series and the parables, John and I usually have 5 laws or principles or secrets, what have you. And 4 of them typically are headed in the same direction. Yeah. And then there's a 5th one that seems to be the opposite, right, of the others. Right. In the Go-Giver, it was the law of receptivity as opposed, right? And so this one is that law. This is the one we call it the thumb in terms of, 4 fingers and a thumb. And the thumb is what, brings it all together.
Right.
Well, let go of having to be right. Well, does that mean you don't care about being right, or that you don't try and be right, or that you're not prepared? No, of course not. You prefer to be right. You prefer to persuade. You prefer to influence. It means you let go of your attachment to having to be right. And what this means is when you do this, you're able to go into learner's mode. Because what happens, and we see this so often in political discussion, political debate, whether it's at a family get-together or some social event or online. We see it on Facebook and Twitter all the time.
Yeah.
We see 2 people on opposite sides who are so attached to their position. It's like, don't confuse me with the facts. My mind is already made up. And what these people, they end up suffering from something called confirmation bias, which is a term that's thrown around a lot lately. What does it really mean? Well, exactly what it says. That when someone hears or sees something or comes across some information that confirms their already held beliefs or biases, well, they accept it, sure. But when it's something that doesn't fit into their already, they ignore it. The challenge is you can't learn that way.
Right.
You can't learn that way. And so when you let go of having to be right, you create the environment where you actually gain more knowledge, which gives you much more power and much more influence. But it also does something else. When you're in a conversation with someone and you let go of that attachment to having to be right, they can tell. And typically, they know you're not just trying to win at all costs. You're not trying to overcome them or defeat them or be right by making them wrong.
Right.
And so they tend to respond in kind, and they lose their defensiveness, and they drop their defenses, and they're much more likely to, again, be able to buy into your thoughts and views.
I love that. I don't keep it a secret that I'm a recovered alcoholic with almost 16 years sober. And
Congratulations.
Thank you. The world's a better place, trust me. But I one of the things that back when I went to some meetings, somebody would say, Ken, do you want to be right or do you want to be happy? And I would say, I want to be both, because I think that all of us have that. There's this incessant need to be right. And
sure.
Wars in countries and economies have collapsed over
That's right.
one person's need to be right.
That's right. You're right.
And anyway, so I love that. Letting go of. Now, how would you recommend, because some people get incredibly attached to their need to be right. Is there any way that you have found to be able to just let go of that?
Well, it begins with acknowledgement. It begins with acknowledgement that this is an issue. Because remember, if you say to somebody, you always have to be right. Well, if they, there's, no, I don't. Yes, you do. No, I don't. And so you're playing that game. One of the things, and I remember Scott Adams, who's the creator of the Dilbert cartoon series, and he's a brilliant, brilliant writer. And he talks a lot about confirmation in his newest book, which is called Win Bigly, which was a sort of a look at how Donald Trump won the presidency, and whether you like it, dislike it. It's a brilliant book. I mean, it just doesn't. It's one that everyone should have. Scott Adams called Win Bigly. And he talked a lot about confirmation bias. And one of the things that Scott said in there was that one of the main characteristics of confirmation bias is that the person who has it doesn't realize they have it.
Right.
Okay. So what we need to do, and I fall victim to that like anyone else. I mean, I have that same need to be right. So the first part is consciousness, awareness that this is a thing. Okay. Yeah. Because if you don't acknowledge it, you can't improve upon it. So when you find yourself just having to be right, and someone calls you out on it, let's say, whether they do it with tact and kindness or not, okay, that's be big enough to ask yourself, could this be true? Right. Again, it doesn't mean it is. Doesn't mean they're right just because they say it either. But we've got to be able to at least question ourselves. We've got to be able to question our premises. Now, I know that I have that natural need to be right, just like you were saying about yourself.
Right.
So, and I remember being in a conversation once with someone, a very close friend of mine, and we were not agreeing on a certain point. And this person said, I think you're suffering from confirmation bias right now. And I remember my first thought was, no, I'm not.
Right.
But I took a second to realize, well, one of the main characteristics of suffering from confirmation bias is I wouldn't know I'm suffering from confirmation bias. So I'm now got to ask myself questions. Why does what this person said make sense or not? Why do I think what I think? Where did I learn that from? Who did I hear it from? Who did they hear it from? Where did they learn it? Now is this a lot of work? Well, yeah, it's a lot of work to improve yourself, but it's worth it.
Right.
And so the first step is just being aware of the need to be right, and then going into a mode where you allow yourself to question your premises constantly.
I love that. I did some training. I don't know if you know of a guy named Ari Galper, but I did some training with him years ago in some VIP club he had or something. I don't know. But one phrase I learned from him that literally changed my existence as a salesperson was instead, because it's always drive, and it was, would you be open to at least exploring the possibility of me being right? Would you be open to it? Would you be open to having, looking at this from a different angle? But and then I only have a couple other, because I don't want to hold you up all day, but what you're a very, very wise man, and listen, from and I mean this from a true friend perspective. You live what you teach. I mean, you live it like nobody I've ever seen. And I just love that about you. You're so genuine. And so what is it from your very wise perspective, that you see other people in the world doing that holds them back from true success?
Well, first, thank you for those very nice compliments. That means a lot to me. I think anything that someone does that holds themselves back from true success has to do with not living in truth. Truth both about the way the world is, whether that's physical nature of the world or human nature. And it's usually about human nature because it's dealing with others.
Right.
And expecting people to be different than what people are. Okay. And not living the truth, not seeking the truth about themselves. In his book, Principles, Ray Dalio talks about, this is a fantastic book, Principles. Mm-hmm. Ray Dalio talks about the fact that, the biggest challenge in the world today is an ego sensitivity to being wrong and not understanding our strengths and weaknesses. I didn't quite quote him 100% accurately, but that was about 95% right.
Yeah.
But what did he say? This is amazing. It's an ego sensitivity to understand, to being wrong. Okay.
Yeah.
I mean, that's something right there. And then to not a resistance to understanding our strengths and weaknesses. And what Dalio also said, and I remember Harry Brown, one of my great mentors of old, saying this, and others, is that people who succeed in life, they deal in truth. It's not a matter of, oh, the world should be this way. It's the world is this way. And it's just like someone who wants to, invent a flying machine, okay, like the airplane.
Yeah.
They didn't say, well, you know what, there's this problem with this thing called gravity, but I'm going to just be really positive and just deny gravity exists. And if I wish it hard enough, gravity won't exist and I can create a machine that flies. No, what they did is they understood that gravity is a thing, that there are laws of physics, right, and aerodynamics and whatever, and they learned those laws. They learned the truths. And then they worked within those truths to create a machine that would work off the resistance and be able to go in the air.
Yep.
So it's only through first being committed to truth that we can then succeed. So I take it the opposite way and say those who are less than successful where they might want to be, more than likely will buy into some untruths or mistruths.
Right. Wow. That's powerful. There are so many people. I don't think you have the live stream open right now, do you, on Facebook? There are so many people just giving so many amazing compliments about everything.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're saying. So
thank you. I appreciate it. I appreciate all of that. Thank you so much.
I'm so grateful you agreed to do this. And then, I think that I was going to ask you what's your, and I don't want to assume, so what is your number one piece of advice you'd give somebody right now to change everything for them starting today?
Well, I think it always begins with an assessment. Yeah. A self-assessment. Where are you now? Yeah. Where are you now? Where do you want to be? And then, maybe bringing people, so we're emotionally involved with ourselves, and it's very, very difficult to really be able to accurately know the areas where we're not quite where we should be and where we need. So I'd say get around people who, and by the way, people who care about you, but maybe aren't so attached to you emotionally that they can't also not see, that they also right. don't necessarily see. So that's why a lot of times a coach is very important, that you put out some money, you invest in a coach and someone who's proven to be able to help. But it doesn't have to be. It could be anyone or come across that is in a position to be able to work with you in that way.
Right.
But that's what I would do.
Right. Bob, you're amazing. How can I, first, if you're watching this and you're not following Bob Burg, please go follow him. Your fan page, I know you're probably maxed out on the 5,000 friends too. So, make sure you're following Bob on his fan page. Bob, what is that? What's your fan page?
It's facebook.com/BurgBob, BurgBob.
Okay. If Jill's on here, by the way, my wife,
Hi, Jill.
She has a big presentation tomorrow. She commented and said she's going to I'm going to use productive framing. Hopefully that's going to help the client get somewhere with that. So that's, my last question is, how can I help you? What can I do to help you the most?
Well, you always do, by the way. You're one of the most encouraging people I know, and you're always encouraging and always helping, and I appreciate that so much. Yeah. I guess if people would like to go to thegogiver.com, without the hyphen, thegogiver.com, they can find the new book, on that page. Just click on the purple cover, and it will take you to a page where you can get the first 2 chapters for free to read to see if you like where the story's going. Then if you do, you can always click through.
And I did that, by the way, before you guys released it. So, and I'm like, okay, I gotta have this book. It's an incredible book. Like I
Thank
highly
you.
recommend it. So, well, Bob, thank you so very much from the bottom of my heart. If there's ever anything I can do for you, you know I'm here. So, is there anything you would like to say to my audience prior to ending this?
I just thank you for being here, for investing your time and being here. Stay a student of Ken because this guy's amazing. And I wish each and every one of you the very best of success.
Thank you, Bob. And hey, I follow guys like you. That's what helps me. So thank you. I appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Bye bye.